All right, here's a second video on stereo field. I hope that you got from the first video that I'm not going to tell you how to do your stereo field and where to place your instruments. You can ask anybody you want about that, but basically you will eventually come to understanding. You'll get a basic understanding of what instruments are in the band, and if you sit back where they can be, and you will start working on it until you can get a system. And each mix is a little bit different. Take the instruments that are in that mix and start thinking about where they can be, and then listen to each of the different sections and figure out where you can put them. And as the sections change, where they would be best panned and sound best and their timbres complement each other, and they are working with each other as they move, so that you don't have things going off one side or the other too much, and you got a nice good stereo field. The other thing I wanted to address is that, accents. You might have something come along, you got a bam over on the right, or a bam off to the left, or a bam, 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 something going on, and bam in your face, and then whoosh off over there, and whoa, come back, and, that kind of stuff. That's all kind of stuff that basically is to taste. And you basically, when you run into breaks like that and you just want to go ahead and try to do something, go ahead and try to do something, dude. Mess around with it. Go and pan it off to the left and, do something wild, have fun. That's what it's about. It really depends on who you're dealing with. Sometimes, your artistic abilities and your creative content of what you can apply, it can depend on who you're working with and what you're doing. And so just take that into consideration. You don't do something totally off the wall for, the new, conservatory, barbershop quartet, from the church. You might want to just go, well, they might go, wow, dude, I don't know. So just take into consideration who you're working for and who you're doing the project for and what kind of music it is. And if it's going to be something that's going to be okay doing it in that. So that's about that, and I might address that later, but that's all I'm going to address that for this moment. The next thing I'm going to address, your stereo field. Okay, now doubling tracks is another huge thing when you're dealing with your panning, because when you've got a mono instrument or a stereo instrument, sometimes that you might want to take that mono instrument and double that track and pan it, another part of it off to the right or left. To try to give it a more stereo sound. And sometimes you might want to take that track and you might want to bounce it, to a mono track and play it as or just play it as a mono track and pan it right and left and double it and see if that changes the sound, because that can be a huge tool that you can use, that you can experiment with on different instruments and in different vocals or whatever. It can have a different effect. And so the doubling of tracks is a huge tool. Panning one off to the other way and one off the other. Even if something's supposed to be right or left at 50, 60, 70, 80%, that you doubling that track and bringing that over, a double of it over to the right against the one that's on the left, and bringing the volume way down on that one on the other side. You might not be able to hear it really well behind the bass or whatever's on that side, specifically, but it will affect the stereo field, and it will make it sound more stereo, that you're hearing the instrument off where it's supposed to be, but that doubled track is off to the other side at a lower volume level that, is really accenting it, that's really building the stereo field of it. I'm not going to make that concept really complicated. It's that simple, that concept, and the applications you can use it on are a lot. Just be real careful when you're doing that you don't start covering up things on one side or the other side of the track, that you're basically trying to have that bass over there and that guitar over there, and you don't want that double track covering it up. You want to come up underneath it a little bit just to give it a little bit more stereo sound. So that's a huge tool to use. And like I said, the biggest thing to remember is just don't muddy your mix and be real careful. Sometimes, things in the lower end can get muddy really fast, and things way up in the high end can get muddy really fast. And, some things in the center, you can get away with that a little bit more. And when it starts getting up in the upper or the lower registers, that it might get real muddy and you have to just kind of listen to it, because sometimes it's really cool that you might have something high over on one side and you double that track and put it off to the other side but a low volume, and it just starts giving a nice shimmer to the mix. Does that make sense? Because you don't really hear that instrument off to the other side because you got the volume so low, but at the stereo field you can hear it counteracting with the side that it's supposed to be on. Does that make sense? And I tried to keep that as simple as possible, that concept, because that can be another huge tool with your panning, to try to build the stereo effect so that, you know, it's not just panning that instrument off to the side. Now you're really trying to work on the stereo field, trying to get a nice stereo field other than just the stereo field of where the instruments are placed. That's another level of working on the stereo field. So I hope I made that concept really simple. The next concept to understand when you're working in the stereo field, there's two other concepts. One is delay, and the other is tuning. First, we'll address delay. If you go up to the Haas effect and you Google that, the Haas effect is going to be where if you put delay on something, that it starts to sound like it's doubling, you know, whereas it just sounds like it's fuller or wider up to the Haas effect. And then once it hits the Haas effect, it starts sounding like it's actually doubling. So if you've got two tracks that you've doubled, you've doubled a track, and you've made pan one off to one side and one to the other, that putting a delay on one or the other, somewhere underneath the Haas effect is a huge tool for the stereo field. I'll give you a prime example. You've got one vocal right and one vocal left, the main vocals, and you've copied the track and you've panned one of them right and one of them left. And even whether they're mono or stereo, it doesn't matter. And you take one of them and you put like, a 12.2 millisecond delay, a 24.4 millisecond delay, or a 36.3 millisecond delay, that it's a delay going on over there. Does that make sense? So that delay is actually building the stereo field, because you don't really hear a delay, but your ear can perceive the stereo field has been affected, and it's building upon the widening the stereo field, which is part of panning. Because when you're doing your panning, you're going to be working with that anyway, because it's going to be very integral while you're doing your panning. And, the Haas effect, I'll use multiples of 3 and multiples of 4 a lot of times. That it'll be like, no delay. The first multiple, 12.2, a quarter, 24.4, 2/3, or 3/4, and then 36.3, the whole. So you've got, 4 multiples of that 0 to 36.3 milliseconds delay that you can use to pan them in different areas. And that's so cool. Or I'll go no delay, 18.3 and 36.6 for one center and 2 right to try to build the stereo field. And, it's a huge tool. The biggest thing you have to watch out for that is phase. And be real careful of drums and bass, because sometimes they don't deal with that real well. But phase is something you have to be real careful of, and you'll hear phase issues. If you've got a phase issue between 1 or 2, it'll become real noticeable, and you can hear it, and you might have to change the amount of delay on that track. But it's a huge tool for building that stereo field while you're doing your panning, because it's integrated into it, that concept. But it's a huge tool. And one example, I'll give you an example, like I've got this vocal break where the main vocalist just goes, and I got one of them, I've doubled his track 4 times. So I've got 4 tracks of him saying that. And I've got one 100% right, one 50% right, one 50% left, and 150 or 100% left. And I've got the one at right at 0 delay. I've got the one 50% right at 12.2 millisecond delay. I've got the one on the left at 24.4 millisecond delay. And the one all the way over to the left at 100% at 36.6. And then it's got this huge stereo sound. It's just like a wall of sound coming at you. And sometimes you can mix and match those. Like you'll go 0 delay, and then you'll go 24.4 millisecond delay. And then on the left, you'll go over that one. You go 12.2 millisecond delay, and then 36.6 millisecond delay, 100% right. And that's a huge thing. It'll just make the stereo field just go whoosh, like a wall of sound coming at you. And that technique can be used all over the place with 2 tracks, with 3 tracks, with 4 tracks. With 2 tracks, you could, have it in half. One of them getting a 36 millisecond 0.6 millisecond delay underneath the Haas effect, or 24.4 or 12.2 to try to build the stereo field, because that little bit of delay between one and the other is actually part of the panning, and it's a huge effect to build the stereo field. And even when that other part we're talking about, you have the double track off to one side with the volume lower, that one being delayed some is a huge effect. You know, I mean, it will actually help build the stereo field of the track and make it sound more full. You have to just be careful of muddying your mix. I'm not going to get real in depth into that concept. That concept should be very, very obvious. I made that as simple as possible and gave an example as simple as possible that you can use that with 2 tracks, with 3 tracks, with 4 tracks. You know, you got 2 tracks, one on the other side. You got 3 tracks, 1 in the center, 2 off to the other side. You got 4 tracks, 2 on either side. And you can even have up to 5 to where you've got 5 of them, you know, 1 in the center, 2 off to the one left, and 1 off the way. I mean, you can really do some wild stuff with those delays to get some really cool effects and stereo widening in your panning, you know, while you're building sections of your song. So that's a huge tool, and I hope I made that as simple as possible and didn't make it too complex, so that the applications you could use it on are a lot. Just be careful not to muddy your mix when you're using it. And the other thing is detuning. That thing, when you've got all those tracks doubled like we were just talking about, those tracks, detuning those different tracks differently. One of them might be detuned 3 cents, another one might be detuned 6 cents, another one might be tuned up 3 cents, and like you've got another, the main one isn't detuned or tuned up at all. And that's symphonic technique, because one violin, you've got 10 violins in a section that none of them are going to be exactly in tune. They're going to be off from each other just a little bit, sometimes 2 or 3 cents, and sometimes steps of 6 cents, you know, and, you know, somewhere in there. And if you don't understand the sense concept, just Google it and you'll understand the sense, how cents work with a whole tone and a half tone. And it's not very difficult to understand. And that technique is huge. And that tuning and detuning that or tuning that up, just that 3 cents is hardly nothing. And, you know, it can be a huge thing. But just like with the delay, if it doesn't sound quite right, try dropping it a little bit less or a little bit more or a little bit less or a little bit less and a little bit more till you find some way or some number that works well with it. Because sometimes it can vary between different timbres and different instruments when you're doing that. And that's the next huge tool. And those used together can, you know, when you're doing your panning and you're trying to do your stereo field, using those 2 tools right there can build the stereo field of what you're working on hugely, you know. And, you know, it's not like you putting on some kind of effect, you know, it's got a knob on it for the stereo widening, you know. It's like, you know exactly what's happening there, and you can adjust it, you know, very fine tune it very well and very accurately understand exactly what's happening there, and adjust phase issues real easy from those techniques. And so that was the next technique I wanted to address, and I hope that I made that real simple and real clear, so that those techniques that we're talking about here are very simple. You can use them in very complex ways, but the actual application of what that is very simple to understand, that you're using delay and you're using detuning or tuning up just a little bit, you know, minute amounts to help build the stereo sound while you're doing your panning, so that the stereo field sounds wider and fuller. And I hope that I made that very simple and very clear. And like I said, you can always ping me or something if you have a question, but those are some more huge tools when you're working in your stereo field, when you're doing your panning and things like that. Peace, hope, love.